Understanding Drainage and Conveyance in Delaware. Atlantic coastal plain. So approximately 94% of Delaware's land area is located in the coastal plain province. It consists mainly of marine sediments overlain by coarse sand and gravel deposited as glaciers retreated during the last ice age. We have extremely flat terrain. Low-lying topography also favors high water table conditions. Soil conditions are highly variable. So we have both poorly drained and well-drained soils. So coastal plain characteristics and challenges. So as we talked about, we have variable soil types, obviously a flat topography, high water table. These all lead to drainage challenges. So as you can see in these two photos that I've attached, one is just a rear yard and trying to maintain that yard, as you can see, kind of where mowers have gone through. And then in the aerial to the right, you can see just sump areas where water has collected and sits. So these site characteristics can be a challenge for all land use activities. Whether you're tilling the land or just wanting your yard to be less soggy, drainage has historically and continues to be a challenge for all. So soil types affect drainage. So we have very sandy soils, which is great for infiltration. So as you can see, kind of the beachy sands. So you'll find those soils in the Lewis and Rehoboth area. That's the Route 1 corridor is really our best area for infiltration. So we'll find really, really sandy soils and good separation from groundwater. So some areas have this extremely high infiltration rates, and therefore drainage is not a challenge. So in some cases, we have stormwater systems that are underground utilizing that excellent infiltration. The only challenge with having sandy soils is that they're highly susceptible to both wind and water erosion. So as you can see in that one picture with a construction site, we'll have wind erosion because sands move very easily. So poorly drained soils, and I feel like this is what we talk about most in Sussex County. So we have a lens of less permeable soil, which restricts infiltration and results in drainage challenges. So we have wet swale conditions, which I feel like we talk about on a regular basis, where we're always receiving calls from residents asking questions about how to maintain their swale or who to call with because they have water sitting in the swale. So it's a very common drainage concern in residential communities. It is a challenge to meet property owner expectations where there is irrigation, high water table, and flat topography. So in some cases, developers install concrete valley gutters or pipe storm drain in order to avoid grass swales. The downside is pipe systems provide less water quality. So as you can see in a couple of these pictures, and these are all pictures that I've taken from residential communities, we are basically changing the soils of a site, and they're being mass graded. We're bringing in equipment, we're bringing in fill, and so we're changing the permeability of those underlying soils. So we're compacting it and we're filling it. And then we're channelizing flows, and we're trying to convey that water typically to a stormwater pond for treatment. So with all of that, and then if you add irrigation systems on top of it, it makes it very challenging to have a dry swale. So, and in some times of the year, especially during the wet season, you're going to see groundwater sitting in some of these swales and ditches for a period of time. And it's very flat here, and it doesn't take very much to change the grade of a swale. So as I talked about, we have high groundwater. So coastal areas, we are just feet above sea level. You go to Bethany and Millville area, sometimes you're only 18 inches above sea level in your yard. So the closer to coast or inland bays and waterways, groundwater is closer to the surface. So, and groundwater is the highest during the growing season. So we hit peak groundwater during between December to March. Typically at the end of February into early March, we'll hit peak groundwater, where you actually start to see water sitting in ditches or in areas that you don't typically see it throughout the rest of the year. Many residents who move to Delaware are not used to seeing water ponding. These are challenges with living in an area that is flat and has a high water table. So historic water management. So crooked streams are a menace to life and crops in the areas bordering their banks. So from the American Forest magazine from 1935, kind of gives you a glimpse of how drainage was viewed during that time frame. So at this time, natural streams in Delaware's coastal plain were starting to be channelized to improve drainage efficiency, and the intent was so that we could farm the land, which was a livelihood for forever, and continues to be a livelihood. And so we'll see that these ditches were put in the farm fields to bring the water table down so that they could farm the land and access it. So just this one last quote I always found interesting: the twisting and turning of the channel retards the flow. Floods result, crops are ruined, lives are lost. So putting these ditches in changed the way farmers were able to use the land and changed production. So flat topography. Areas have been ditched in order to lower groundwater so that the land can be farmed or developed. So many of these ditches that were originally just intended for agriculture have now been used for stormwater outlets. So we still today rely on these ditch systems to drain our neighborhoods. So in Delaware, you are never very far from water when land is developed. So the potential for impacts to ecosystems and natural areas is significant. So historic water management. The Delaware tax ditch law was passed in 1951 to establish a process to manage and maintain the ditch system by the affected landowners. Tax ditch watersheds range in size from the 2-acre Alban Park tax ditch in Newcastle County to the 56,000-acre Marshy Hope Creek tax ditch. The tax ditch system consists of over 2,000 miles of ditches with a total drainage area of over 600 square miles, most of which drains to the Chesapeake Bay. So tax ditches can range from being only 2 feet wide to up to 80 feet wide. They can be 2 feet deep to 14 feet deep. So we do have a variety of tax ditches that provide drainage throughout the state. So there's over 230 organizations in the state manage 2,000 plus miles of ditch channels. So the county breakdown: in Newcastle County, there's 26 tax ditches. Kent County has 78. And Sussex County, not surprising, has 137. And so they were formed through the Superior Court. So which is a tax ditch? The answer: they all are. So interesting enough, as farmers relied on these tax ditches to drain their farm fields and improve their production and provide, enable them to access and increase their farming acreage, we now rely on these tax ditches to drain our residential communities. So, and in some cases, we've had to pipe or relocate these tax ditches for neighborhoods. So they've changed over the years and will continue to change. But one thing that doesn't change is that they provide drainage for a watershed. And those people pay a tax and they rely on that system to function so that they have adequate drainage. So tax ditches are organizations formed on a watershed basis to construct and maintain a drainage system. The organizations are managed by officers who are elected by the taxables. So they have a tax ditch manager, a secretary, a treasurer, and they oversee the maintenance and operation of that system, and they meet to discuss what work is needed to make sure that it functions as intended. So the law declared that the drainage and the prevention of flooding of lands and the management of water for resource conservation shall be considered a public benefit and conducive to the public health, safety, and welfare. And that's so important that these systems are in place and that they're routinely made, because they have become so important to farmers, to neighborhoods, to even our roadways that also drain to them. So a tax ditch organization function: they collect taxes sufficient to provide funding required for the maintenance. So whether they're controlling vegetation on the ditch bottom and the slopes, which is done every 1 to 3 years, so they're mowing or weed wiping, and really they're trying to get rid of any kind of tree sapling growth. They're making sure that that right of way associated with that tax ditch is maintained so that they continue to have access to the ditch in case they have to do significant work such as a dip out to restore the channel to its design grades. So really it's imperative that they continue to do that routine maintenance to make sure that that system is going to function for years and years. So here's a picture of a tax ditch dip out. As you can see, the excavator is located in the tax ditch right of way. It's important that they keep the right of way free of any kind of trees that are block access and any kind of structures. So you can't have a shed or garage or anything that's constructed in that right of way so that that piece of equipment has access to that tax ditch. and that they can do the work necessary to make sure that it continues to function for all of those people who are in the tax ditch watershed. And so when that excavator goes in, he's really trying to minimize his impact to the side slopes. We want to make sure that that area stays vegetated so that we minimize erosion, and they're really just clearing the flow channel, removing any kind of obstructions in that are in the center, and to allow that water to flow efficiently as possible. So mowing and weed wiper. So they'll go in and mow down the trees, any kind of tree sapling and vegetation, 1 to 3 years. Now the weed wiper bar is a system that just scarifies any kind of woody vegetation and shoots in a herbicide, but leaves the undergrowth in place so that we're really minimizing impacts to erosion. We're really trying to keep those side slopes vegetated. So the less impact to the ditch itself will allow it to function as intended. So DNREC drainage section provides technical assistance to tax ditches. So they provide both federal and DNREC permitting assistance. They provide assistance on the tax ditch ship outs. They work with the different tax ditch organizations and the managers, making sure that they're meeting and providing technical assistance as needed. They also assist when there's culvert pipe installation in tax ditches, any kind of bank stabilization or erosion issues that need to be addressed. They also provide assistance for invasive species management. They provide tax ditch managers with the documents that are needed for just standard business operation. So open access tax ditch map. So there is a tax ditch map. So if you're curious if the ditch in your neighborhood or on your property is a tax ditch, you can easily find this information out by going to this website. It is very user-friendly. It only requires that you put your street address or tax map and parcel number in, and it will take you to your property. And then you can click the different layers to determine if there is a tax ditch there, if you're in a tax ditch watershed, and then where the right-of-way is associated with that tax ditch. So interesting enough, not all ditches are tax ditches. So we get lots of calls from property owners saying to us, hey, this tax ditch on my property is not working, or the tax ditch in my neighborhood, somebody needs to come out and maintain it. So in a lot of cases, we'll find out that the ditch that they're referring to is not a tax ditch. So we have used ditches historically to drain farmland, and not all of those are tax ditches. So they're not located in an easement. There's no designated right-of-way for maintenance or access. They're not regularly maintained, but they are still used as an outlet for stormwater facilities. They can be clogged and are obstructed. So the challenge with these non-tax ditches is that you have to obtain permission from downstream property owners to access it if there is some type of blockage. So it can be a challenge maintaining drainage and continued function in non-tax ditches. So blocked drainage conveyances. With a high groundwater table and very little topographic relief, it does not take much to block drainage. And we have found this all too often. Restrictions can include grass and sediment, lack of maintenance, trees, debris, landscaping, homeowner improvements, improper grading or culvert pipes that incorrectly, and erosion. So all of these things contribute to how that ditch functions. So as you can see, I've got a ditch in the flow line of the one picture. And then the top right corner, I was just showing a picture of, they had come in and treated the Phragmites. So vegetation is always an obstruction and a challenge, and you need routine maintenance to make sure that it's not going to block any kind of culvert pipes or flow. And then in the bottom right is my coworker, Craig. We had an issue with a stormwater facility, and we couldn't figure out why it wasn't functioning and drawing down as intended. And so we took a walk downstream into the ditch that it was outfalling, only to find this huge tree growing in the flow line. So it's very important to make sure that you can provide maintenance of any kind of system. It gets a little bit more challenging when that blockage is on somebody else's property. So preventive and routine maintenance. So inspect ditches regularly and before and after large storm events. So I always tell people during hurricane season, really look at your ditch, look at your stormwater and look at your ditch where it's outfalling to, and see if there's any blockages, what maintenance is needed to go ahead and get that ordered through a maintenance company and scheduled, and see if they can make sure that any kind of pipe crossings, box culverts, everything is free and open and allows that water to flow through. Get those Christmas trees that have been dumped into that ditch out. Try to make sure that that system can function as adequately as possible if we do get a significant storm event. So, and then monitor for erosion and washouts. And just as important as it is to look at that ditch before a storm event, it's equally important to walk it after, especially a significant storm event, and see, did I have washouts? Did a tree fall in the channel? What do I need to address for the next rain event? And the other thing that we always stress to people is properly dispose of landscape and vegetation. And this is just an education and outreach with challenge with every community HOA. And you cannot police what every neighbor is doing, but just encourage them not to put those grass clippings and compost in the ditch itself. So roadside and rear swale conveyance. So drainage is already a challenge, and then we add irrigation, compacted filled soils, impervious cover, and mowers. So as I said earlier, we're changing soils in neighborhoods. We're grading them, we're filling them, we're channelizing flows, and then we're putting irrigation systems on these elevated yards that are compacted, and we're funneling it and directing it all to these swales. And we're expecting that swale to be dry. And this is a challenge. And you may be doing your job as a property owner and managing your irrigation system as appropriately as possible, but your neighbor thinks that more is better and he waters more frequently, which is creating a challenge for you. So there's nothing that we can do on some of these issues but to educate people as much as possible on proper irrigation systems and not overwatering, and then when to mow. So if all of these play a factor in how that drainage system is going to work and function long term. So another issue that we see, especially during the wet season, so between that December to March when we hit peak groundwater, we receive a lot of calls on sump pumps and how to discharge. So this is something that is not regulated in Sussex County. We see sump pumps, they're used for crawl spaces. And then if somebody has a basement, we'll see up to three sump pumps. And during the wet season, as groundwater starts to increase and we peak elevation in late February, early March, we will see sump pumps running all the time. They will run, every couple of minutes. And where does that water go? So it's either going to your backyard or it's going to the roadside swale in front of the house. So this is a common drainage complaint in residential communities. It can become a nuisance issue, but not something that we regulate. And so the only thing that we can do is just make recommendations in these situations. So how are widespread drainage issues addressed? So in Sussex County, we have agency collaboration. So DNREC drainage section will provide technical assistance to tax ditch organizations, and any drainage complaints where the community is older than 1991, meaning they do not have a sediment and stormwater plan, they are directed to DNREC drainage section for technical assistance. Any drainage issues pertaining to DIPOUT, so maintenance issues in road right-of-ways or flooding on roads, those get sent to DIPOUT for assistance. So any kind of drainage concerns pertaining to roadside swales in residential communities, those issues are directed to Sussex County Public Works for technical assistance. And any kind of stormwater issues, and we provide technical assistance. And then we also provide technical assistance on rear and side swale issues. So drainage and stormwater public contacts database. So this is a statewide single point of contact and tracking database as a result of Governor Minner's Surface Water Task Force. It was launched in early 2007 and only tracks concerns from DNREC and partners like Newcastle Conservation District, Kent Conservation District, and the Sussex Conservation District. So if you call the Drainage and Stormwater Assistance Hotline at 302-855-1955, your drainage concern will get logged into a database and then directed to the appropriate department for technical assistance. So there are technical resources and questions. So anything, resources that are available. So for DNREC drainage section, if you have questions or concerns pertaining to tax ditches, please call our office. Any stormwater issues or concerns with rear and side yard swale issues, you're welcome to contact the Sussex Conservation District for technical assistance. There are homeowner and HOA fact sheets available on our district website that are very helpful. We did recently develop the swale fact sheet, which is something that we recommend homeowners pass out to the residents in their neighborhood, just to talk about, it explains how a swale works, how to maintain it, the do's and don'ts.